Welcome to the Canadian Association for the Club of Rome's Zoom series presentations. My name is Rick Carpenter, and as today's host, it's my pleasure to introduce today's speakers, Rosemary Kralik and Dr. Barry Bruce. In their presentation on agriculture, climate, and health, they will enlighten us on how regenerative agriculture and plant-rich diets could reverse climate change and improve human health. Rosemary was born in Egypt. She moved to the UK when she was 4 years old and later emigrated to Canada. Her experiences in graphic art, architectural drafting, and systems design in management consulting. Inspired by Allan Nation and Joel Salatin's ideas about regenerative agriculture, she purchased a 73-acre farm in Hemmingford, then a 722-acre farm in the Lanark Highlands, which she manages alone. Dr. Barry Bruce grew up on a farm in Guelph, Ontario, and practiced family medicine in Carp, just west of Ottawa, for 48 years, with a special interest in primary prevention. He started ExerFarm in 2018 to provide a venue for patients to get exercise and improve their nutrition. He also became involved with Deep Roots Food Hub, a not-for-profit corporation with a mandate of food security and the construction of an above-ground, off-grid root cellar in 2018. The vision is sustainable local food systems everywhere. Following their presentation, we'll take questions in the order they appear in the Zoom chat function. Rosemary and Bruce, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So thank you for inviting us, all of you who are attending, to present on a transformed agri-food system. So for most of human history, we numbered under 1 billion people with negligible ecological impact. Now, not because of any failures, but because of our successes, we're running out of resources on a planetary scale. We're going to briefly, so here's what we're going to tell you. We're going to briefly present the features of the current agri-food system as an example probably of how not to design a food system if sustainability is an important goal. Then we're going to present the features of a more ideal alternate global food system. Then we're going to tell you what the two of us are doing right now that's relevant to that. And finally, we're going to suggest a way forward. So first of all, what about the current agri-food system? Well, it gets an F- from me. It's just unsustainable. Most of the crops globally actually feed livestock, over 75% of them. They don't feed people directly. And the result is 800 million people starving. Another couple of billion are food insecure. Another couple of billion just have horrible diets. We're heavy meat eaters, and we have rampant disease. There's 31% of greenhouse gases globally produced by agriculture and the food system. Worldwide, 75% of global soils are degrading, and that's because of constant tilling, which at the same time kills our mycorrhizal web and releases 75% of the carbon that should be under there into the atmosphere. Inorganic fertilizers, they starve soil organisms and wash into waterways. Glyphosate and pesticides kill indiscriminately. There's monocropping. Pests really like if they can attack one plant and have all the other ones exactly the same, that's good for them. So that's why we need pesticides. Land use has really peaked, and the only way we're keeping it the same in terms of acreage is by destroying forests and jungles. Feedlots. Animals are crowded together. There's disease and stress and antibiotics. Food miles are long. Cities have only 3 days of food at any one time, so they're a bit vulnerable to supply chain interruptions. To boot, fresh water and oceans are degraded largely because of agriculture, and 30 to 50% of food globally is wasted. So an ideal global food system, at least what we think is more ideal, is one where everybody's well nourished and so on. It's sort of the opposite of what I've just portrayed. And we think local food systems everywhere is an important feature of those. What we want is a global food system that has the purposes to include the reversal of climate change to the extent possible, to provide excellent nutrition for us all, and to leave us a healthy planet for our grandchildren. So who we have to assume are doomed if we don't. So this is my 5-year-old granddaughter, and I'm suggesting that we design a food system so that she and all other grandkids could live to be healthy 104-year-olds. If we made the current agri-food system obsolete by substituting the one we're proposing, how would climate be impacted? And potentially by how much? So one of my favorite sites called Drawdown focuses on climate solutions and the degree of impact that each solution has. And I've organized all their solutions onto something that to me looks more like a Pareto diagram. The largest single impact is way over to the left, and that's food waste. So as with any Pareto chart, roughly 20% or 25% of the problems of the issues cause 80% of the problem. And of that 80%, food, land sinks, land use, agriculture, they all contribute about half of that impact. So that anyway, whether or not you believe that exactly, I think it's clear that a transformed food system that pays attention to these solutions would have a very large impact on climate change. So more specifically, what are we, meaning Deep Roots Food Hub and ExerFarm and Rosemary too, I think, I hope.
Yes.
Are proposing to be our new food system.
We mustn't get confused between industry and agriculture. When you say agriculture produces methane gas and causes problems, it's not really agriculture. It's when agriculture is industrialized, and it's the industry which causes the problem.
Okay, well, we won't fight, and we'll call it industrialized agriculture. How's that?
That's wonderful.
So here are the parts that we think are important to a circular food economy. So the grow part has to be regenerative. So regenerative growing, building soil biology, carbon fixing, and of course, food, thrifty harvesting, and local storage, ideally minimal processing. That's what we say in health circles all the time. So highly processed foods are going to kill you. And so local marketing and distributing are important. We have to have a way for people to purchase this. And if they don't have any money, we have to find out a way for them to at least acquire it, even if that's just temporary. So meal preparation and nutrient recycling are very important. Education. We're going to go to a basically plant-rich diet supplemented by Rosemary's meat. We need to know how to cook that and how to cook it in such a way that it's delicious, appealing, and nutrient-rich. So over on the right, you'll see meat. And meat, well, we think that animals should feed themselves, and you'll find out later that that's a feature of Rosemary's type of agriculture.
Yes, they're very good at looking after themselves if you let them.
I know.
And if you don't subject them to crushed cattle feedlots and food that they wouldn't normally eat, soy and corn is very hard to digest, and that's why you end up having to give them antibiotics,
Yeah.
which is not good for us.
No, it's not good for us. But these animals are very lucky. They're on a huge farm. There's lots of forest and wetlands, and they're out there exploring and munching, at least in the wintertime or summertime. In the wintertime, Rosemary's bringing them hay,
The best
the
hay
best
you can
hay.
find.
Which could be regenerative in itself.
Because what I do is I put it on all different spots each day
Yes.
of the field. And the field that was previously neglected and in bad condition not only has residual seeds that they don't eat and fiber trammeled into them, but their own manure. Everything is spread and evenly enriches the soil. So every year the pasture gets richer and richer.
Okay, so if Rosemary's had a chance to boast, maybe I should take a chance to boast here too. This is ExerFarm. This is last fall, and probably one of the first regenerative crops I'd grown. So I'm here digging carrots, and up they come. This is a single handful of carrots. I think some of the people in CACOR, when we get together, have had some of these carrots. Anyway, they're one handful. There we go.
Beautiful.
So these were grown regeneratively, at least no tilling, no fertilizer, no insecticides, herbicides, no irrigation even last year. It was about 11 hours per week of volunteer labor per quarter acre. We grew other things other than carrots, obviously. I used the lawnmower a lot at some points, a scythe at other points, string trimmer when we had to go in between rows. So that's regenerative carrots. Another look at what's regenerative has to do with what Elaine Ingham is doing. She's a PhD. She's been involved for decades with soil. And I'm going to play you a quick video. In a healthy soil, many nutrients are provided to the plant roots. What's grown needs to be, though, for direct human consumption. And we think that should not be filtered through an animal. And what we think maybe is the elephant in the room actually a cow. So for every 25 calories of food put into a cow, we get 1 calorie out, plus a pile of methane, antibiotic-resistant bacteria, and chronic human diseases. So I'm not sure that's a great trade-off. So regeneration is really not the focus for the majority of the world's farmlands. In fact, it's the opposite. So what about animals? Well, the problem with meat that we see in the supermarkets is that the animals are slaughtered young at 18 months. You think those are still children, right?
Yes, mine are slow maturing. The ancient breeds are much slower maturing. The industrial breeds will give you 1,800 pounds of meat in 18 months. And the reason they're slaughtered so young is because bovine spongiform encephalopathy, or BSE, mad cow disease, cannot be detected before the age of 2. So they slaughter all the animals before the age of 2.
Wow. Okay, well, this is an example of stockyards. They're all crowded together, and I guess fortunately, I don't think know what's in store for them. So these animals are fattened up on grain or corn, the things that are themselves likely missing important nutrients. Soy, those are the three main crops grown on Earth: grain, corn, and soy. They transmit diseases easily in these close quarters, and they require antibiotics frequently. In fact, most of the world's antibiotics are consumed by livestock.
Because they can't digest. Those are very difficult grains to digest. So they have to be given antibiotics to keep them alive while we're fattening them up.
But it does make them fat.
Yes,
which is,
and that fat is thrown out because we don't appreciate fat.
or we eat it and it causes illness. So antibiotic resistance develops with such rampant use, and those resistant organisms cross over to human beings, making life difficult for the rest of us who have to deal with infectious disease in humans. So there's a long list of chronic diseases that are caused by excessive consumption of this kind of meat, processed foods as well, including obesity, diabetes, vascular diseases. Vascular diseases give us heart attacks, strokes, peripheral vascular disease, and so on. So not very desirable, but very common. So this particular slide shows us blood vessels that have been treated with a plant-based diet. 177 patients adhered to this diet, 21 did not. Of the 177, one stroke occurred while they were being observed. Of the 21, 16 of the 21 had adverse outcomes. So roughly 100 times the above event rate. This restoration of flow compared to before happened within about 3 weeks. So proper nutrition through a whole plant diet is essential for health, and it can be the difference between healing an illness or treating its symptoms. This is a physician called Dr. Klaper, who's one of the leading lifestyle medicine specialists around, and one of the earliest. So, so you're going to tell us about your kind of animals, though, later, right? The ones that hopefully
Sure.
don't cause us these illnesses theoretically, and maybe Dr. Esselstyn will come and study your animals and the people who eat them someday. So this slide shows mammals and just how dominant are we. So every icon is equivalent to about 1% of the global mammal biomass. And this includes wild animals that are on land, wild animals that are in the ocean, mammals. So we're talking about whales and porpoises and so on in there. So can anybody quickly find the wild mammals and tell me, are they there even? Well, they are. I see 4 of them in the green zone up in the left upper hand corner. There seem to be an awful lot of humans. My gosh, 34% of this chart. And then what's the rest of it? Well, it seems to be livestock, which is 62% of global mammal biomass. So wild animals now comprise about 4% of global mammal biomass. And just to make things worse, the lack of soil structure in the agricultural system results in widespread erosion or desertification, resulting in the loss of productive land to such a degree that we may have less than 50 harvests left. But once we've harvested, we can, what we've grown, at least in Canada, may as well preserve it in some way to get through the winter. And so there's root cellars of the kind that we built, 70,000 pounds of root vegetables capacity. And we also have freezing, we have pickling, fermenting, drying, freeze drying, all suitable for creating a food stockpile. Some crops like flint corn, beans, lentils, grains, they store well dried. Minimal processing can ensure that some types of produce can be stored for later consumption without a significant loss of nutrients. And a transformed food system also has to think about distribution. And we are, with our current centralized food system, food often travels long distances. While transport itself is not a major cause of greenhouse gas emissions, too much dependence on this leaves the risk of supply chain breakdown, the risks of lack of local autonomy and self-reliance. It's less reliable because we have no control over how the food is grown. And we have no leveraging of local climates and soil systems where we could grow efficiently. Also, if we're going to eat next to or no meat, this long distance transport would have to ramp up enormously, transporting many times more vegetables all those long distances. So I think there's no choice but for us to grow all this locally in local food systems. Food waste is an enormous problem. Cities are not food secure, but they would be if they grew within around their borders. In Ottawa, for example, having 300,000 acres under cultivation could be food self-sufficient at a quarter acre per person. So we're proposing a decentralized system, sustainable, avoid waste, and to be truly sustainable and circular. Here's a bit of yuck factor for you. The waste products from humans should probably be applied to the soil. And this is a design challenge in itself. So land area is a crucial consideration for transformed sustainable food system. And this slide is from World in Data. It supports the contention that we could grow enough for all the world's population on much, much, much less land, about 1 billion hectares, compared to about 5 billion hectares total. We also think we can grow enough food on a quarter acre to feed one person for a year, as I said. The remaining billions and billions of acres could return to nature. In fact, nature could include hybrid models like permaculture food forests. So can you imagine going into a forest and shopping for your fruit and nut and roots and vegetables and
forest bathing is also good
forest
for you.
bathing? Yes, that's always been something that I've wanted to do. In addition, there would be negligible erosion and contamination of the waterways with fertilizers, herbicides, and pesticides, which we would not use, allowing for recoveries of rivers, lakes, and oceans. So much for theory and what's out there. What are Rosemary and I, in particular, doing to put the preceding principles into practice? So Rosemary has a few words here.
Yes, well, I always loved good food, and my passions have always been sciences of all kinds, and agriculture demands all of the sciences. So for 35 years, I've regenerated whatever properties I've had. They're not monoculture pastures. They're broad environments, which are not really good for conventional farming, but the kind of animals I have, love them. The Tibetan yaks are good on highlands, and the Scottish Highland cattle are also very good in those territories, and sheep and goats. So I have I purchase the best hay that I can all winter long for them from 5 or 6 different sources to maintain a variety. And I put it in a different spot each time. So what the animals don't eat, that fiber is trammeled into the soil to create more humus. All the viable seeds that come off the hay sow themselves, and the animals distribute their own manure. So every year, as I inspect the pastures, I notice that they've become richer and richer, and in so doing also sequester more carbon without having to be plowed or seeded or fertilized or worked in any way with heavy machinery. The variety of food is also excellent for the animals. The pregnant and lactating females like blackberries and raspberries, and at different times of the year, they like certain kinds of shoots and shrubs and barks. And to be able to go and find the nutrition when they need it is very important. And all that means nothing if the last day is hell. So I take each individual, normally dozing in a bed of hay, to the abattoir, and they stay in the trailer, calmly sleeping or eating until it's their turn. And the first step out is when they are killed. And the lack of stress at that part of their life is also beneficial to the meat and to us. The reason I have these particular cattle is because they produce the highest quantities of not only omega-3, but CLA, conjugated linoleic acid. This protects the animal from disease and anybody who eats the animal. And it's the first thing that disappears if you take an animal out of its environment and try to feed it something else, like corn and soy and grain, which is why you end up having to give them antibiotics. So in all the years I've had them, there hasn't been any incidence of disease. They don't even have parasites because I have hardworking chickens who follow, banties actually, who follow the herds, cleaning the pasture and preventing any parasites from being ingested. I work very closely with the inspector at the abattoir because I need to know the condition of each animal. It's important to me because it's all well and good to have lots of ideas, but if they're no good, you have to change the way you do things. And so far, they've told me that my animals have been in great condition and there was no incidents of any kind of hardship or disease. The other benefit of their meat is that it's so rich in nutrients that it's satisfying. So you don't need to ingest vast quantities.
I know. I can only eat half of one of your yak sausages.
Yes, they're very rich. And so most of my clients are still very trim. And well, if there's anything you want to say, I can come back and
Sure.
mention more.
I'm sure. Okay, well, thanks, Rosemary. So on my part, oh yeah, we have to look at the goats at play and the Highlands and these resting animals. The yaks really like to be scratched behind the ears. I know from experience. Anyway, on my part, speaking of health, I practiced medicine since 1973. I now know that many conditions that we've accepted as normal really aren't, and can be avoided or even reversed, as we've seen already. Whoops. To quote my friend Rosemary, if you don't know what you're doing and eat tortured plants or meats, you might end up with a new set of diseases. And if you'd said that 70 years ago, which you didn't have a chance to do.
You'd be laughed
Anyway,
out of town.
you would have been laughed out of town. And I'd also like to remind people that in spite of Rosemary's animals, we're not really basically meat-eating predators. We can eat small amounts of meat, but our teeth are actually more meant for grinding plants. Our molars are not shears, and our intestines are about 4 times the length of the intestines of true predators. So we need to, I suppose, eat meat that are more our pets than anything.
Well, that's beneficial to us rather than taxing our systems.
Yes. So in 2018, I started a thing called ExerFarm for patient volunteers, and they could get exercise and better nutrition by doing manual organic farming. And the same year, I led a team that built an above-ground, off-grid root cellar capable of keeping about 70,000 pounds of produce between 2 and 4 degrees centigrade and 90 to 95% humidity. And I chair that organization called Deep Roots Food Hub. We continue to fine-tune the root cellar, but really, what we're really fine-tuning is our approach to food security. Our belief now is that climate change is the greatest threat to food security that has ever existed, and that a local approach, if scaled up and replicated, could have profound impact on both the climate and on human nutrition. Replicated around the globe. So I know that sounds ambitious, but probably it's going to be meaningless if it doesn't. So we might as well be ambitious. Our vision is sustainable local food systems everywhere. And such a sustainable local food system would have to be designed. It needs to maximize carbon sequestration, to foster the production of food varieties that are attuned to the local environment, to have economies but not diseconomies of scale, to preserve locally as needed, to market and distribute locally as possible, to educate consumers, provide them with the tools they need to ensure that no one suffers from food insecurity within the local food system, to be an efficient, sufficient, and waste-free circular food economy, and to be replicated or to be replicable. Reversing climate change, I guess that sounds ambitious, as I said, but the fact is doing nothing even an option? The good thing about emptying the carbon land sinks over the past 100 years is that we have vast empty carbon land sinks. And it's our job to fill them up, whether it's animals or plants that we're growing. The capacity of these is such that we can reverse climate change within 6 years, theoretically. The agricultural footprint would shrink by over 75%. Nature, in the form of all kinds of plant and animal species, would rebound in the billions of acres thus abandoned, and they would also store vast amounts of carbon beneath the surface of the soil. Think forests, wetlands, grasslands. Humans would consume a plant-rich, ideally mostly vegan, but some meat, diet, and human health would improve vastly. So national health budgets would shrink. So let's assume for a moment that we're given full rein to design this new system. And this is just a slide that comes from Bruce Mao's book, Mao Massive Change 24, which outlines things, and it's a fascinating book. especially for someone like me who realizes that we are in, I think, with this particular project, the design phase of it. So this brings us to a close, and I think that's our presentation. There's me with my grandson on my shoulders and butterfly on my flower. Thank you.
If I could add that I was inspired by reading for years the Stockland Grass Farmer, which was edited by Allan Nation. And it was the oldest farm it is the oldest farm publication in the States since 1947. And it has now been taken over by Joel Salatin. And all the material that I read there and the books written by Joel Salatin are not only humorous and down to earth and problem solving, but they give you the simple way to approach producing good food without traveling it and without abusing it. So
there's no excuse for the people
there's-
watching here not to take up
no, you can go
farming
to
like you did.
you could go to Audible and try one of Joel Salatin's books, like You Can Farm, for free, and just listen to it while you're doing other things. You don't have to stop what you're doing. But it's a life-changing procedure. If I can do it, and I'm in my 80th year, anybody can do it. Yes, it's a lot of hard work, but it's very satisfying, happiness-inducing work. And I may not be a millionaire, but I'm really grateful for the health wealth that I have, mental, emotional, and physical. I haven't had a cold for 35 years, and I'm very happy for that. And I think if everybody grew their own carrot and made sure that their food and meat wasn't tortured, even if it might be more expensive, it would not be as expensive as getting ill later on in life and having to rely on a government health programs.
So fewer hospitals and hopefully not fewer doctors. But anyway, so I think it's time for questions. Rick, I think, is going to monitor the chat and let you know if and when your turn's coming. So I think it's over to you, Rick.
Thank you very much, Barry and Rosemary. This is such an inspiring presentation. One just little admin point, the video that you ran about the absorption of CO2 in with the planting,
Yes.
did not show. It did not come through. So perhaps you could give the URL to Art, and he can post it on the CACOR
sure
site.
Okay, that's too bad, because it was a neat little video.
It sounded good.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And I was very happy to see that the diet that you are recommending includes meat, although we aren't big meat eaters at all. It's interesting that meat can be included in this regenerative agriculture system. And I gather that it was the discovery of fire all those years ago that made it possible for our predecessors to cook their meat and thus have an easier burden of digestion so that it left energy over for developing our brains. So we might not want to get rid of meat as long as it's cooked.
Well, and as long as it's the way that Rosemary produces it, I'm not sure the same is true for most of the meat that we have available, because most of it was produced in enormous stockyards or great big chicken coops, or, pigs that are thousands and thousands of pigs concentrated in one area. So I think that's what we have to change. But yeah, I think if we can go, if we can eat small amounts of virtually wild meat, then there's no proof that would harm us at all and make to us good. I don't think they've had enough studies done on Rosemary's kind of meat to show that it does the kind of damage that other kinds do. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we've come to the question period now, and I believe at last checking we had one question. There may be some others, and we'll be perhaps Anita Thorog, you could come into the waiting room, because as the host, I'm going to take the opportunity to ask the first question. As I say, your talk is inspiring. Regenerative agriculture is very persuasive. However, industrial agriculture has been successful, in quotation marks, financially, because the true costs to the natural world are not priced in. And I'm wondering if you can point to any success in moving in the direction of regenerative farming, so long as those real costs are not actually included in the normal farmer's budget.
Right. I can't point to any specific incidents of that, but Denmark has, so I think what we're talking in terms of how to shift budgets, we're talking about maybe a governmental level here. And there are some very perverse subsidies that are given to the to industrial agriculture that could be taken away and put to better use. Denmark is the first country in the world, actually, and this is fairly recent, to do something about this on a governmental level and take it on as a project. I do have a slide on that, but I think that's probably just enough to say, if you look up Denmark and agriculture, you'll probably get that. But I think you're right. Even the economics of agriculture are questionable when you look at it from a farmer's standpoint. The farmer takes home 3 to 6% of his investment, and my cousin tells me. And the rest of it goes to makers of large equipment, to makers of GMO seeds and fertilizers and glyphosate and pesticides, and banks. And a number of farms aren't able to make the grade, so the bank buys them up. So the economics of regenerative agriculture are little different. The inputs are cheaper, and the outputs are food that is consumed directly by people. So those two factors mean that we're not filtering out our calories that we grow from 25 to 1, as I mentioned with the cow, but we're eating them directly. So I think there's a lot of things in there that make sense, not to mention that one of the largest, certainly the largest item on a provincial government's budget is the healthcare budget.
Yes. I would like to add that there are a few countries that have not been drawn in by Monsanto, and those that have suffered so badly after the first year of good results. They realize that they cannot continue the cost of purchasing seed and purchasing glyphosate and all the chemicals that are required. This has happened in India, and they're changing, the government is changing their opinion of allowing companies like Monsanto to go in and take control of the farmers. In the Stockman Grass Farmer and in the books by Joel Salatin, you will find a lot of information on that, on the importance of regenerating the earth. We had in North America, for example, a topsoil that took millions of years to create, that was 25, 30 feet deep in some areas. And that has been completely eradicated by our defective farming techniques and our big equipment. You cannot plow every living thing off the soil and leave it for the wind to blow away and the rain to wash away and expect to be able to go on. It's the organisms in the top few inches, the aerobic organisms in the top few inches of the soil, and the anaerobic organisms underneath that the plants require for their food. And once you have overturned them and killed them both, you are relegated to having to use fertilizer. And that does not give you a crop that is fulfilling your requirement for eating that crop. So, for example, in North America, there's a rampant lack of magnesium in everybody's diet, and that gives us tremendous diseases and problems, health problems. So mistreating not only the plants, but the animals is vital. And the problem with economics is that it never counts the destruction of the process.
Wow.
So you think that you're just getting all the resources for nothing. You're not. You're paying a price. And since it doesn't happen immediately, you cannot relegate the disease that you suffer after 40 years of feeding yourself improperly. You cannot relegate the cause of your disease to a particular activity in agriculture. People have to learn why and what to throw down their gullet and not accept the avaricious predations of the companies that are trying to sell you garbage. And very often food companies don't want to pay dumping fees for the garbage of what they produce. So they hire a scientist to go into the lab and find a way to puff it up or color it or put salt and sugar and oil on it and give it a name and sell it in a big bag for children to eat. It's not food.
Well, yes. And I think we realize that in medicine, but are not able, I don't think we have given ourselves, or we've not created the tools to allow us to help patients to take another route.
It's education.
It's education, and
Even if we're grown up and we
Yeah.
have degrees,
Yeah.
if we haven't accepted the reality of life, the responsibility for growing ourselves and looking after ourselves, then we are still emotionally or mentally children.
And I have, so David, or Rick, sorry. I do have a story about magnesium and another little tidbit on what happens to the mycorrhizal web if you till it, but do you have some other questions?
Well, we
On deck.
could take, we've got two questions right now. I can't find Anitra. She seems to have disappeared. So I have two questions. The first one is from Dave Doherty, and then Richard van der Yacht, you could be on deck, and we'll still probably have some time after that, and we could take this point up then, Barry.
I see Anita has come back to life.
Oh, you've got Anita there, have you? Anita,
so.
are you on?
She's muted.
Anitra, your mic.
Thank you.
Okay, Anitra, you go ahead, and Dave, you're on deck, and then after that, Richard.
We're doing something quite similar to this entire mycorrhizome and exudates into the soil in the marine world. And it's very interesting that there's such a similarity. Of course, this has been very degraded over a period of time by tremendous amounts of activity in the coastal zone and in the estuaries, especially the soil and the plastics and other things coming down. But what we find is that we have about 30,000 teragrams between the seagrass, the mangroves, and the coral and the marshes that are still there, not degraded, and that we probably could put back about that much too. And this could be put back within 10 years. So it's an interesting parallel, and I would suggest that you might want to look at that and see if there wouldn't be, between what you're advocating for and the things that the marine people are advocating for, some similarity and some general program. This, of course, should be done on a small scale, and in the case of the marine, done in the tropical nations, which grow the sequester the carbon much more rapidly.
Wow. Okay. That is something I personally had never thought of. Do you have any seagrass or mangroves on your property?
No, I do have wetlands which step in as wonderful pasture when we have a drought. So I've never had to be concerned about about droughts, the land is fairly flexible that way.
Thank you for that question, Anitra. Yeah, so parallels are there, and tropical. So what you said was that the tropical plants probably grow much more quickly and therefore
Yes.
sequester carbon more quickly. Do they break down? What's the net result when you double, say, a patch of mangroves or whatever?
What it is that their growing season is 12 months a year instead of 5 months a year for the temperate or 3 months a year for the boreal. And that's why there's so much more exudates down into the sediment. But when the mangroves grow, they don't start sequestering quite as rapidly as the marshes and the seagrass, which start in their first 3-4 months sequestering heavy amounts. But they do act as habitat and shelter as well as food for
Yes.
a very large number of marine animals, including the mammals that you missed in your chart, which are the manatees and the dugongs. But the
Yes.
porpoises and some of the other mammals eat directly from the food web of the mangroves and the seagrass. But coral reefs too, which is halfway between plants and animals, can be regenerated, and they of course suck in a lot of carbon because of the plankton that are inside the coral reef, and that can bring down the total amount of atmospheric carbon. As you know, carbon is somehow partitioned between the land and the sea, and the sea carbon is what these sea plants are mostly drawing in and sequestering. So there's like 68% of the Earth's excess carbon in the sea, and the rest is in the atmosphere, and that's what the sea plants are sequestering and firmly putting into the sediment,
Okay,
which is how fossil fuels got there in the beginning.
right.
They also provide a tremendous restorative nutrient for animals and cattle, particularly, that have suffered deficiencies because of the way they're treated. You can get different kinds of
Supplements.
kelp and
Okay.
products that they package for cattle.
Wow. Okay. Is that it, Anitra?
Yes.
Okay. Next question, I guess.
Yes, thank you very much, Anitra. We have a couple more questions, starting with Richard van der Yacht, and
Yes.
followed by, first Dave Doherty, then Richard van der Yacht. So go ahead, Dave, please.
Thank you. So I want to go back to one particular aspect of your talk, which was about healthcare costs.
Yeah.
My background to this is, I would say, humans are mortal. No matter what we eat, we will all die. Eventually, we will receive end-of-life care, if we're so lucky. So arguably, a radical shift in diet for many of us will not result in long-term medical cost avoidance. Indeed, various studies have shown that living healthy lifestyles, which actually does require coaching, will actually increase healthcare costs.
Oh,
So I'd like your reaction.
I don't believe it.
Well, then you're arguing with the United States Office of Management and Budget, and
Yeah.
many other places, including myself. I was in charge of a study at Health Canada that looked into this in a great deal of detail.
Right.
And it is, in fact, the case.
Okay. Well, I guess I don't see good health as necessarily, it's not necessary to prolong life, but I think we can have a healthy life. I think both Rosemary and I are getting up there, and we're healthy. We're not a burden on the healthcare system.
But you
And
eventually will be, because over half of your lifetime healthcare costs will happen in the last 2 years of life,
yeah,
unless you get hit by a bus
yes,
and killed
yes,
on
you're
the
right.
street. If you're taken to hospital, all bets are off.
It is coming back to me now that that's true. I'm not. So what is also true is that we are the predominant health burdens that we carry are chronic diseases. And we
Correct.
carry those for a long, long time.
That's right.
And some of those chronic diseases very much destroy our quality of life. And I'm thinking about Alzheimer's. I'm thinking about more common cause of dementia, which is vascular dementia. So while you could be right, and I remember, I mean, I was chief of staff of a hospital, and I remember now, yes, you get into hospital, and that's when most of your healthcare costs occur. But I don't think that has to be the case. I think the people who are doing those studies are making an assumption that change we can't change the burden of disease in the last few years, and that it by default has to result in hospitalization and otherwise heavy amounts of care. So I think maybe while I certainly believe you, because now I can remember those figures, but what I don't believe is that has to be the case.
Yes, and I am. I've got to put a word in of skepticism. I worked for years with some very interesting and high-placed people in health and welfare. As a matter of fact, I was involved in the first national study called that Zach Sabri, another Egyptian, put together. And they studied not only the health, but every aspect of socioeconomic activity and education and geography and every aspect of life. And it gave forth volumes and volumes of books. And I think what they came up with was a profile of how your life and the way you live it and your diet and your activities affect your health in the long run. Nutrition Canada, look it up. And if we could get Zach Sabri to come on CACOR and tell us what he's learned, it would be interesting to find out.
I think your animals are probably an example of maybe what we should be doing. Your animals, as opposed to 99.999% of animals on Earth, or farm animals anyway, have not required a veterinarian in the last 25 years. And instead of having to be dispatched because of some chronic disease or being eaten, which is more likely, they just laid down and died. So,
Well, the 3 or 4 that came because they were supposed to live out their life, they weren't supposed to go into the food chain because they were pets for a lady.
they didn't require palliative care.
No, for example, Jeannie died last year. She was 24 years old and she just lay down and went to sleep.
Yeah.
And she never suffered any disease. But I mean, that's just one instance in billions. But the point is, if we systematically look after ourselves better, I think it's beyond question that the quality of our life and our health will be on a higher scale.
Okay. So can we agree to disagree?
Sure. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
Okay.
you very much, Dave, and thanks for these answers, Barry and Rosemary. We have one last question from another medical doctor. Richard, you have the floor.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just saying this is very timely, this talk, because just in May, there was an umbrella review, which is a review of many meta-analyses that were undertaken between 2021 and 2023. And really, I'm just going to summarize it down to a bullet, but I did put up the link in the chat. But really what it showed is that by using a plant-based diet, there's a significant decrease in ischemic heart disease and cancer. And those are the 2 biggest killers.
Yes.
So, right. So really, we can't argue with that. I mean, there's some heterogeneity in the study, but they did say there are economic benefits as well. So all that to say, it came out, Leslie Beck wrote about it in the Globe and Mail. So it's a recurring message and you're reinforcing that message. So I would fully support what you're saying. I think that's been very good. I really think it was very, just on another point, I don't know how many of you have seen the film Into the Weeds, and it was, you can look it up on YouTube and watch it. It's about 90 minutes or so, but it's really about the whole case against at that time was Monsanto and now Bayer, and the whole case of glyphosate and its carcinogenicity. I actually met the patient who's the subject of the film. So it's quite the interesting story, but how Monsanto suppressed the data so that they could continue to sell their product all over the world. And it continues to this day. You can still get Roundup all over the place. Even though we went, a whole group of us went to the Ontario government and asked for them to ban it, so there would be no cosmetic use of pesticides in Ontario. And they agreed to the ban, but it's not enforced. So it's still sold at all kinds of stores. You can get it anywhere. So.
Well, thank you for that. The glyphosate is, well, everything you said is interesting. The glyphosate, I was talking to Dr. Claper about glyphosate, and he pointed out that it's considered safe for humans because we don't have this particular enzymatic pathway that glyphosate uses to kill plants. So the shikimate pathway, or I probably don't have that quite right. But he pointed out that many important organisms in our own gut microbiome are affected by glyphosate.
Correct.
And that many of those organisms interact with the brain in that they produce many of our neurotransmitters. So it's quite possible that glyphosate, I think, contaminates our food system, that we're getting small amounts all the time.
Mhm.
that it has the capacity to impact our mood. Think of serotonin being
Oh, yeah.
inhibited by glyphosate. So, and many other important things that the brain does. It's so complicated that I just don't think we just are
Well,
scratching the surface on this.
if you see the film Into the Weeds, and it actually outlines, it actually has a whole list of all the things that glyphosate is actually in. And it's
Yeah.
quite astounding, really.
And I'll tell you a story about one of the properties that ExerFarm we're trying to bring into production, and we're finding trouble doing it. And it was the only property that had succeeded a typical monoculture approach.
Mm.
So heavy machinery, for one thing, producing compaction layers, but also the use of glyphosate and pesticides. And inorganic fertilizers, of course, which they suppress the plant's ability to provide glucose to
Yeah.
those organisms. And so I thought, well, it's been 3 years since there's any possibility for glyphosate to have been applied to this particular property. So I did soil testing for glyphosate at 3 inches and 6 inches down, and on 2 different sites on the property. They all showed the metabolite for glyphosate, AMPA, and 3 out of the 4 showed actual glyphosate. So glyphosate does not disappear, at least in our experience. And I would be hesitant now to eat the plants that grow on that property because plants can concentrate some of these chemicals, including glyphosate.
Mhm.
So think of what is grown on heavily glyphosated, I can't think of the right verb, but glyphosated properties are most of what we eat: corn, soy,
Yeah.
wheat. Those are the three commodity crops that are grown worldwide that comprise much of our food system. And most of our food is actually various combinations of that. So
Mhm.
I don't know of any studies that have shown glyphosate in actual food, but I'd like to see them.
Oh, yeah. Watch Into the Weeds.
Okay. Well, hopefully it'll give me all of those answers. Are there any more questions, Dave? Or sorry, I keep calling you Dave for some reason, but Rick.
Well, Rick will do. Thank you very much, Richard, and thank you, Barry, for that response. It's time now to conclude this presentation, and I'd like to call on Ted Manning, the chair of the board of directors of the Canadian Association for the Club of Rome.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting and a little off-putting because I like to eat too, and I may wake up in the middle of the night wondering whether I might go cold turkey.
No
one
snacks for
of one of the things I think we do need to do, Barry and Rosemary, that was really terrific. It got us all thinking and all worrying, but also the notions that there are actually things we can do. And I'm wondering whether we need to invite a psychologist or a psychiatrist to talk to us, because the one real skill that our members and others don't appear to have is self-preservation. And I think it should be taught universally in some fashion, so at least they would listen to the kind of risks and warnings that we are able to give them as, quote, experts.
Right.
Anyway, that said, just one other point before I go back, before I go on, is that put on the chat the fact that the Club of Rome and Anitra mentioned earlier, several of us have been looking at restoration of soils, coastal zones, areas where really there is some potential to restore some of the mess to the point that I will try and get on our website at CACOR the actual references to these presentations done a few months ago for WAS and for the Club of Rome. Anyway, that said, thank you very much again for talking to us, and we will leave it open after I finish thanking you, where we can all talk to each other informally and off the record.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, please stay around for a little while if you wish to. And I'll do the commercial. Please join Canadian Association for the Club of Rome if you can, and if you're going to join with us, because that pays for us able to do these very good presentations. And we'd also mention that every one of our presentations is available through the CACOR website, and you're welcome to look at it. Art and David usually get it on within a very few hours or a day at the most. So thank you again for coming, and we will now let you go and have a very nice week and or weekend.